South Korea's biggest ever arms deal happened last week with Poland. This makes South Korea a major supplier of weapons flooding into Europe, particularly since the war in Ukraine began. The sale to a NATO member, which is Poland in this case, involved more than 1,600 tanks and howitzers, as well as 50 fighter jets. South Korean and Polish officials signed a framework agreement last week in Warsaw. Poland says the deal is a key part of its efforts to try and rearm in the face of the war in Ukraine. Poland has sent more than $1 billion in military aid to Kiev. The first stage of this deal will involve 180 tanks and almost 50 howitzers. The first deliveries are expected later this year. A second stage will also include more than 800 tanks, 600 howitzers, and by 2026, both will be produced in Poland. Now, Poland has traditionally bought weapons either from the United States or from other European NATO partners. South Korea was not exactly on their radar. On Crux DeCode, why is South Korea selling weapons to a European country? Will it not risk alienating Russia, a country which has deep influence in East Asia? Polish Defense Minister Mariusz Błaszczak says that South Korea was the only player that could provide these new weapons fast enough. It's extremely important that the first deliveries of these howitzers and tanks will take place this year itself. That, according to him, was one of the chief reasons why they went with South Korea. Now, for countries in NATO's eastern flank, the prospect of cooperation with South Korea is rather interesting, because the war in Ukraine has become a stimulus of sorts for the South Korean arms industry. The reluctance of some countries, in particular Germany, to act swiftly has opened up this opportunity for South Korea. Now, somebody's got to arm Ukraine, and South Korea is seizing the opportunity. Remember, countries like Germany, France, they've all dithered in some key military supplies to Ukraine. Now, Seoul has gone out of its way to share that this weapon sale has nothing to do with Ukraine. A US ally, South Korea's policy is that it will not provide Ukraine with any lethal aid. Seoul is also trying to do a fine balancing act because it is sought to avoid antagonizing Russia. Korea cannot afford to anger Russia, both for economic reasons as well as, of course, the influence that Moscow has over North Korea. So when asked if this deal signals a greater involvement by South Korea in the Ukraine conflict, South Korea's foreign minister Park Jin stressed that it was only done bilaterally with Poland and that he doesn't envision any larger role for South Korea in the Russia-Ukraine war. Poland has already given Ukraine some of its Crab howitzers, which is made with components from South Korea. A spokesman, in fact, for South Korea's defense acquisition program said that this does not confirm the details of the individual export approvals. They also said that the latest deal with Warsaw is not related directly or indirectly in helping Ukraine, but simply aimed at boosting Poland's armed forces. But that is only a part of the truth. Yes, of course, this is a business opportunity and South Korea is lapping it up. But more than that, it is also a political gesture. South Korea will get a hit in terms of its relations with Russia. In fact, the Export-Import Bank of Korea says that South Korea's arms exports have hit a record high of more than $7 billion last year. But this deal, this one deal alone with Poland, could completely dwarf the entire weapon sales that happened in 21-22. Officials have not confirmed the value of this particular deal, but just the fighter jets alone, 50 fighter jets, that alone is worth around $3 billion. US-based defense analyst firm Forecast International says that this deal between Poland and South Korea could be the biggest in Poland's entire defense allocation for the complete year of 2022. That stands at about $14 billion. So this one deal alone between Poland and South Korea could top that figure. It's like all of the companies, whether they are large or small, they have come together to work on this one project for a whole year. That's how a former executive at Hanwha, which is a major Korean defense firm, that's how he put it. The Polish defense minister says the deal goes beyond merely filling the gaps that are there right now in the Polish armed forces. It represents what he calls a strategic approach. Now, this deal also includes technology transfers that will see Poland building many of these South Korean weapon platforms. Now, among the weapons that are involved in the deal are variants of the K2 Black Panther tank, which is manufactured by Hyundai Rotem, and then there is the K9 Thunder, which is a self-propelled howitzer, which is built by Hanwha Defense, both major defense contractors in South Korea. In fact, Hanwha Defense says it plans to establish a whole branch in Poland and to use that branch for expansion into the European defense market. They are wanting to sell, among other things, K9s, the Redback armored vehicles, and of course, guided missiles. So one thing is absolutely clear, that South Korea has taken a concerted call, a call which is not just a business opportunity, but also a deliberate political call that it wants to get involved, either directly or indirectly in this case, in the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. What sort of fallout this could potentially have, particularly given South Korea's own concerns with North Korea testing at least a couple of times in the last 6 months of the Ukraine war intercontinental ballistic missiles, all of that still remains to be seen. But South Korea, under the new president, is making a concerted call that it is in its interest to try and go further in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Not necessarily take a full outright position on it, but certainly make the most out of the opportunity that this presents itself.